Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am very excited and truly grateful to have with me someone who I recently came across and who has already become one of my favorite, if not my favorite, geopolitical experts. This is lady from United States, Barbara Boyd, who is, and actually I'm gonna show you, who has this amazing YouTube channel with her colleague, Susan, can you say the last name, Barbara, of your colleague, please?
Susan Kokinda.
Susan Kokinda. Promethean Updates is the YouTube channel. As you can see it right here. I showed you the videos from this channel, I believe twice, if not three times. And you can also find Barbara's work right here on her website, which is fantastic, Promethean Action. And before I close this window here, I want to read you about Promethean Action, and that is a political movement dedicated to defying oligarchy and unleashing the fire of human creativity. So I am really excited for our conversation today. Barbara, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining me today, finding time for interview with me, and for all the work that you're doing on your channel.
Great. I'm very happy to be here. Let's get going.
So let's start with my first question. That is pretty simple, however, complicated as well. Who is President Donald Trump's biggest enemy? Is it foreign or is it domestic?
Well, in the United States now, it's really what I call foreign domestic. Okay, we've got a lot of people who have forgotten what America was founded on and what its principles are. And basically, we have a political establishment which has been, for years, really, we date it since 1971, taken over by a political elite which is at war with the American people. They have deindustrialized our country. They have basically imported a culture which is really violently crazy in many respects. They have instituted the Green New Deal and all of the energy stuff, which actually came along with deindustrialization. And, like many nations, we have a collapsing demography, a collapsing birth rate, which is very deliberate because they set out in 1973, when you actually track it back, to, with a new Malthusianism to actually, lower the world's population. And if you study history, you recognize that there are certain principles which define empires and define oligarchies. And one of them is this whole idea about control through depopulation, through suppressing the working and middle classes, through all of the things we've seen and which people call globalization. And really the modern form of the British financial empire, which is the latest of these historical empires going through history, operating off the same principles, really, evolves in 1971 through 1973, when the Bretton Woods monetary system was actually destroyed by Richard Nixon. And it allowed them to come forward through such things as the Trilateral Commission and other things, and call for, okay, basically, we need to have a society which is deindustrialized, and most of all, we prevented third world development, which was a major part of what they were trying to do. So he's upending all of that. He's saying, let's go back to something called the American system of economics. But most Americans don't know anything about that. They say, what is that? Is it, the market? Is it the invisible hand? Is it all of these things I've heard all my life? And the answer is no. It's basically invented by Alexander Hamilton. You got to know your history at this point. It was used by Lincoln. It was used by McKinley. It says we have trading relationships where we're constantly striving to, make the new inventions of the new century, where we have constant scientific and economic progress. How do you do that? Well, it doesn't mean you favor capital so much. Humans make capital, according to Hamilton, according to Lincoln, according to all of those people. It's human creativity which actually drives economies. Therefore, you have to have your focus on the working class, which is what Trump is actually doing. He's turned the Republican Party, of all people, of all things, the Republican Party, we're for Wall Street, we're for forever wars, we're for all of these things, which was the old Republican Party. He's now said, no, the Republican Party under me is the party of the working man. And ironically, he goes back to FDR, of all people, in the Republican Party in saying that. FDR's whole idea in the Depression was, I'm for the forgotten men and women of this country. I'm going to elevate them, not through handouts, but through creating an economy where work and the dignity of work, of actually having a mission in life, is what you really want to do. So that's a long answer to a very provocative question.
No, but thank you so much. Truly is, without the vision, men perish, right? If you
Right.
don't have the vision, you perish. But when you mention McKinley, who was known for tariffs, I believe,
Yes.
right? And you also mentioned Lincoln. So those two were assassinated.
Correct. They were assassinated because we say they were assassinated by the British Empire. And the reason they were assassinated was because of this conflict, which is a complete conflict between the British system, which is the old imperial system, and this wonderful invention of Alexander Hamilton called the American system. If you read the works of Henry Carey, who was Lincoln's economist, he says quite stridently, there are two systems before the world. One basically favors capital above all, and would immiserate the working classes. The other favors labor because it says labor creates capital, because man is essentially the creator of all things. Man participates in God's creation directly. So it's two different visions of man also, in addition to two different systems. The British system believes that we're all animals, that we're basically, the victims of our own sense perception, that we hop around like bugs in a petri jar, because that's kind of how they view the human beings. We believe, and the American system believes, that we participate in God's creation. That, if you take our name, Prometheus, what did Prometheus do? Zeus was an oligarch, okay? Prometheus, and he hated human beings. Prometheus stole fire, and with it forethought and hope, and gave it to mankind in that wonderful myth, all right? He was punished and attacked by Zeus for doing that, just like people attack really creative human beings like Elon Musk and like Donald Trump as some other species than them. And, it's in part that which drives the attacks on Trump, in addition to, recognizing that he represents a very different way of thinking, which is alien to them. They all chatter among themselves about all of the wonderful systems of really oppression. And what he's looking for is freedom, freedom for your mind, freedom for your mind to actually function on a mission to, when our founders came here in the first colonies, they said, there's a mission here as we escape Europe to do the good, to find the good and to do it. And that was basically at the center of our Constitution, at the center of all of our founders' thinking. They studied all the empires. They were very, very well educated and classically trained. And they said, we've studied these things and we see where they fail. And our Constitution is really the result of that enormous study. So, that's really critically where this battle is now in our country.
Barbara, I want to stay a little bit longer within this first question. But when you were talking about creativity, I always think about that evil cannot, it can only destroy. And that
Right.
looks like, because there is no creative force, even this whole image of Moloch, I think that is half woman, half man, and there's no creative energy really there. That's why it's this combination of both into one, which is it's just sickening. But the first question that I had was about this enemy. You know, when I look at the Republican Party, I also wonder, because when you know the evil, you know the evil. Let's say the extreme left Democrat, like truly, truly evil. Let's imagine an example. We know what we are dealing with. But don't you think that the worst and the most disgusting is when you pretend to be a friend, but you are not? So don't you think those rhinos are actually much more dangerous as far as the enemy? And how do you see that going forward? Because it looks like there is only one party that pretends to be two parties, which is kind of formula around the world, to be honest. But what do you think about that?
Well, look, what Susan talks about is not rhinos, but trinos. And she uses the term trino to say the people who pretend to be Trump's friends, but are really not his friends at all. Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, these types of people are very clear in the fact that they want to, have the forever wars and wreck Trump's agenda, and are appalled by what the American people voted for. Far worse, in my view and her view, is people who are pretending all of a sudden that they're converts to Trump when they're really not. Now, so far, we have a very interesting dynamic, which is the overwhelming vote for Trump on November 5th, which was much larger than even has been reported. And the coming into being of this new coalition of young people, disaffected Democrats, minorities, the beginning triumph through J.D. Vance and others of something people in Poland will recognize as Catholic social thought. Some of that has come into the mix at this point, particularly around the encyclicals of John Paul II. There are lots of things happening, but you had a mess to begin with. The Republican Party was a really horrendous mess. And he's now bringing through the same kind of transitions we see going on elsewhere. A new generation is emerging of younger people who lived through the financial collapse of 2008, who lived through aspects of many of the younger people also lived through 2001. And they're really looking for, a bold new shift and a change, as are people who've been oppressed by the present system. And that's the change in the vote. All right. So the Trinos and the Republican Party of old is sort of stuck at this point. And, the midterms are coming up. And we look at it not as, some kind of thing where we've just got to hold on somehow against all of the opposition. We say, no, 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 no. You don't understand your own power at this point. What we've got to do is we've got to actually increase the Trump majority in the party by running, very, very inventive campaigns out there. Along the lines of, we've got to bring these economic reforms to the fore. He's doing that with energy. We're starting to think we're building 10 new nuclear plants for the first time in God knows when. We're building energy throughout the entire economy at a very, very rapid rate, which is creating new productive jobs, not jobs that are, gig economy jobs, but jobs where the goal is one wage earner can create a family and can sustain a family, which we absolutely, that's a necessity and a mission we actually have to have if the entire country is going to survive based on the kind of demographics we're actually seeing. How do you support, an aging population at this point if you don't have a younger base within your population to actually work. It's a big problem. So he's doing all of those things to put our economy back on a sound footing, but also to put the culture back on a different footing. You know, he's an opera lover, just like Lincoln was a lover of Shakespeare. And he reaches for, you know, those concepts, which most people think of him as going to the, you know, going to the fights all the time and doing all that stuff that he does commonly. All right. But he used to, when he was in New York, go to the opera all the time. And that's really important because you have to educate at the same time as you're bringing about this change, which is really what we're trying to do, you know, very, very rapidly, as quick as we can.
Barbara, I remember, I think Fyodor Dostoevsky said that beauty will save the world. You know, for me, for example, beautiful architecture and beautiful things are so important for the soul. And I will say this, I remember a while back, I watched on YouTube a video with President Trump showing his estate in Ireland or Scotland. I think it was in Scotland. And in that particular estate, because he really paid attention to the details, to the chandeliers, to the very intricate design on the walls. And I think a lot of people, well, you know, I'm European, Eastern European, so I grew up in a certain culture that it's full of arts and beauty, and it's so important. And I've noticed that he pays a lot of attention to that. And what you just said just confirms that this is exactly, it's a very complex image of a person. It's not just business, money, but it's also other aspects, right, to it. I want to ask you now about.
I should interject one thing. He is absolutely devoted to the idea of eliminating all the brutal architecture in Washington, D.C. and reinvigorating the beauty of that city, because he says, you know, it should be the central capital of our nation should be beautiful. It's not at this point. We have this brutalist architecture, which is really awful. The FBI building being an example of it. So no, he's very, very, very much into that and into building exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you. So let's go to the British Empire topic. I would like to ask you, because you've studied the influence of that empire, and actually, like you said, it goes way back, the Dutch Empire, British Empire. I just want to ask you a simple question. Has the country of United States, the people of United States, have they been taken advantage of and pushed into the World War I, World War II, and many other military conflicts that had been stirred up around the world because of those powers? So, you know, when people now look at the US, and I have to take responsibility for myself too, it's easy to say, oh, US does it, the collective West does it, this does it, this does it. But who really does it, Barbara? Who really pushed those, who pulled the strings, who pushed the buttons to create those conflicts?
When you look at history, what you see in terms of World War I is that we had a president, Woodrow Wilson, who was actually controlled by the British through his chief, advisor, Colonel House, who was a complete British agent. And, you know, the whole idea here that the British had and has obsessed that empire is the idea of conquering Eurasia, you know, all of Eurasia. And Russia stands in the way of that, obviously. So you see this obsession with Russia, but it really is an obsession with this whole idea that Eurasia holds huge mineral and other resources for a financial system, because the way they operate, their financial system is completely limited and can't grow in the way that the American system grows, because we have a mission for growth. They have a mission, if you look at all of their edicts, that we don't want growth, really. We want a system that basically gives us loot, if you will, in terms of how the thing actually works. So World War One, basically is pulling the United States into a war between the European empires at that point in time, with the idea of completely defeating Bismarck's Germany, which was trying to emulate in many ways the United States. And they had this idea of using Germany as a fulcrum against Russia. All right, so then what happens in World War One? A horrible war. It's a war of attrition. It's just devastating to everybody concerned. The international psyche hardly recovers from it. And then we have the rise of Hitler. Now, who sponsored Hitler? Well, if you really look at the history, what you find is that it was sponsored by Manhattan bankers, namely the Harriman family, and that, George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott, played a very critical role in that. And in fact, American intelligence actually cited the Bush family under the Trading in Enemies Act for trading with the Germans. There was this whole New York establishment, along with the British establishment, which created Hitler in many respects. They financed him. They made all the agreements with the people in the Ruhr who were behind the so-called conservative revolution in Germany. He was, which is a pretty shocking fact if you actually look at the famous film Triumph of the Will, Hitler was an environmentalist. He was really into all of the things which later came to haunt us in terms of development. And the original idea is we're going to use Germany to march against Russia and they'll destroy each other. All right. Now, it didn't happen that way. Hitler turned around and attacked the British. And, basically a horrible war resulted because he had to be stopped. The entire notion was really horrendous because he cannibalized his, it's perhaps the best example of their labor policy when you actually look at the concentration camps. Slave labor down to the bone, and particularly, obviously targeting the Jewish population. So we came into the war.
Barbara, sorry to interrupt you, but it was all the Slavic bloodlines overall, not just.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about that. You got it exactly right in many respects. It was just the slave labor policy was the key policy here in order to feed the military regime. The Russians sacrificed millions and millions and millions of people, along with, as you say, the entire Slavic nation to win World War II. We came along with American system methods, which are now being studied in Washington, by the way. In other words, what Trump is looking at is what were these methods we used during World War II to be able to go from saying we can produce an airplane or a tank in 3 years, which was then the prognostication of all of the producers, to turning it into 1 week. And that kind of productive leap is what we need now to get out of all these crazy deficits, created by Biden and others. But at any rate, that's a side thing. So, basically we brought Germany to its knees in the Versailles Treaty, led by the British after World War One. It went through a horrendous depression, and that in turn was the fertile ground upon which the Nazi movement was born. It was originally a left-wing movement. When you look at the history of the thing, it was the Strauserites. And then, Hitler basically went with the conservative industrialists, and they created the Nazi Party, through the Night of the Long Knives, killing off all of the left-wing faction and, creating what became the Nazi war machine. And we studied it here. There was an actual a Native American intelligence grouping at that point, not something controlled by the British as it is today, which essentially said that, there's this phenomenon led by bankers, they call them synarchists, which created these two divisions, Nazis and communists, Nazi communist. play them off against one another, go back and forth, etc. And these synthetic ideologies were created specifically to create wars. So that's, in short, my take on a very, very complex story. But it's something I started studying a long time ago, trying to figure out Carl Schmitt, who was the guy who actually was the legal, I call him, he's called the crown jurist of the Third Reich, the legal beagle, who actually created all of the Nazi laws and so forth and so on. And where did he come from? So it's been kind of a side study of mine in terms of looking at this thing.
Thank you so much for this. And I want to also mention in one of your latest videos, I think it was Susan's video. I don't think it was yours, or maybe yours. After the summit, NATO summit in the Netherlands, I want to stay on British Empire for a moment. That, in my opinion, is no more that powerful. That's my opinion. However, there is still some jumping up and down and showing off a little. I want to ask you, because that was during that summit. Was it during the summit? No, it was Zelensky met with King Charles.
Yes.
And King Charles, as it was mentioned in one of your latest videos on your channel, is openly pushing this agenda for continuation of the war between Russia and Ukraine. So destroying more people's lives, destroying the country, that's what they want. So now my question here is this. Is King Charles the spokesman for those powers? Because we know that he is openly talking about the New World Order, World Economic Forum. This is the same subject here, the same agenda. Is he the spokesman for that? And how much power that British Empire has?
Well,
Barbara?
yeah, there's two things that you have to look at. One is that the British Empire functions through what is called soft power. All right. In other words, they call it soft power. And by that, it goes all the way back to an understanding by Lord Milner and Cecil Rhodes that the way we take the United States back is not militarily. We do it through financial control, educational control, and cultural control. And that's way, way back. They said that at the point that the Rhodes Trust was actually set up. And that evolves around the monarchy. The monarchy is a powerful force. It is not necessarily the controlling force at this point, although I expect that it will begin to try and reassert itself in the next generation. Clearly, that's what's being set up here. And if you think about the World Economic Forum, Prince Philip was the guy who actually, played a major role in creating that. And at the center of it is this Malthusian outlook, this idea that the world has too many people and that we have to reduce populations to maintain control by any means necessary. So war is one of their favored means, particularly a war of attrition like Ukraine. And what's happening here is that, once again, this British idea of we need to figure out how to conquer Eurasia, which is the goal here. And we need to, we had Putin at one point, we had Russia at one point, right after the fall of the wall. Putin came along and snatched Russia back from us, right out of our hands, all right? We can never forgive him for that. And we will continue to attack him, which is how these people think, until we take Russia once again. So they're not going to give it up. It is an obsession. As to their power, it is mostly financial. If you look at the dope trade, if you look at all of the black economies, all of the things which fuel the present so-called, new financial order, Wall Street, all the speculative stuff. Essentially, it's a major force. It's not necessarily just the city of London, that horrible strip of land right in the city of London proper, which is the central banking apparatus, but it extends out to all the what are called the black economies of the world, all the stuff that trades in pornography, child enslavement, pederasty, and drugs. All of those things are laundered through the Bahamas and other places, along with all the money of the world's oligarchs who want to keep it safe from being seized by any financial investigation or anything else. So, the HSBC, Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, is a good example. It's made its money for centuries from the dope trade and is still being sanctioned as of a few years ago for money laundering. Somehow it continues to be, a major force for British imperial forces. So, basically coming to recognize this for what it is, what we have advocated, and I think President Trump is pursuing, is you need a contrary force which is more powerful than this. Now, how do you get that? Well, you take the major producing nations of the world, where most of the world's population is at this point, Russia, China, India, and the United States, and you form a trading bloc, which is actually, because it's producing, real things as opposed to trading in paper, it's far more powerful than this empire. And with that, you actually defeat it. And that's the overall idea that we're kind of pursuing.
Thank you for explaining this. I have one more question in this first part, and then I will have the second part of our interview that you will find on my Patreon and Locals community. I know it's a new format, but I started doing something like this from today, and we see how this goes. Barbara, you've mentioned in your video, who controls I'm quoting you now, literally you. Who controls the future of Eurasia and the United States, and with that, the future course of the world's economy? So that was, let's say, that power, British Empire, was that power that was controlling that future for a long time. So are you saying now that this new formula, because that's how I see it too, I am in complete alignment with what you're saying as far as the future, how I see the world coming together for that and fighting that. And this is the great awakening, in my opinion. That's how I would describe it. Besides the spiritual aspect of it, this is the tangible, three-dimensional, economic, creative, productive, great awakening. But how do you see the role of BRICS in that?
Well, I think that BRICS was set up by Goldman Sachs, if you actually know the history, as an alternative to try and hedge against precisely like a development like what I'm talking about happening. Okay, and you can't do this without the United States. You can't actually change the world economic order without the United States. That is an illusion. China right now, you got all these little problems in terms of what I'm saying. You have a kind of globalist tendency within China. After all, it's profited from actually, sort of being very smart about how to place itself within that old order, and does things that irritate a lot of people at this point. You have Russia, which on the one hand is terrific, and is actually scientifically developing. On the other hand, still gives credence to things like the green energy proposals and things like that, which are not in Russia's real interest. And one thing which my mentor Lyndon LaRouche often said to these countries was, don't imitate the worst aspects of the present order. What you need is true national economies working in the interests of every single country. And then you need to come to kind of an understanding of cooperation, not necessarily on all fronts like the globalists do, but let's say we want to go to Mars. All right. which involves a vast array of new discoveries all of us here on Earth have to make. What if we cooperate on that? Lena LaRouche proposed way back when that the actual way to win an alignment between the Soviet Union then and the United States was not the Cold War or arms control treaties, but working out between the two of them, how do we create a total defense against nuclear weapons? How do we disarm nuclear weapons? How do we ensure that each nation doesn't have to be afraid of nuclear terror? So you do advanced projects on the boundaries of present human knowledge with your agreements, and you break the hold of this ideology, which is really what the British Empire is. It's an ideology. It's not an understanding of, as we started out with, the creative aspects of human life or human beings. How do we conquer disease between our four countries? All right. How do we actually do that kind of advanced science, which breaks the boundaries which we've all been operating under, enhances our understanding of God's universe? And that's what Trump is actually pursuing. If you look at his speech in Saudi Arabia, you'll see that. He says, we don't come here to tell you how to live or to tell you what to believe or to do these other things. We come here to help you build. We want to build. We want to build a new relationship. We want to build a prosperous society. And we got to figure out how to do that, given all the diversity that we actually have in various cultures. What LaRouche often talked about is let's find the highest expression of these cultures in other countries as we would define it. And let's emphasize building on that. That's how you actually give people a national identity, which, turns them into people who are missionaries for the good, not by telling them, these horrible things about all the things you're doing wrong at this point, but finding, for example, with Iran, there's a huge culture there, ancient Persian culture. It had wonderful people in it, like Ibn Sina and all of these other great philosophers. It's the Promethean you want to find in every single culture, and you want to find it and actually emphasize it. But, most of our numbskull diplomats at this point would prefer to just try and assert power. I think Trump is kind of on that wavelength. I don't think he's necessarily completely there yet, but it's clear where he's going, and it is exactly along these lines.
Thank you. And when you're saying this, it's really, I so appreciate what you said, because this is, in a way, how I think. We are created in an image of God. So what does it really mean? That there are many expressions of God, but ultimately it all leads to the same essence, to this highest frequency of love and expression of self, never ending evolution. And it can be presented in many different ways, but it really comes from the same place, which is so beautiful when you think about it, right?
Right.
And it helps actually one another. It stimulates one another.
Absolutely.
So Barbara, I'm gonna have 2 or maybe 3 more questions for you. So everyone, this is the part 1. I hope you enjoy it. If you are interested about my questions, and now we're gonna go a little bit deeper into Israel and Putin. I'm sure many of you would like to know. Go to my Patreon and locals, and you will find out what I will ask Barbara about. Okay.